Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 32nd chapter in the book of Job. We're going to hear from a character we haven't met before, Elihu. He is a young spectator observer who, after a stunned silence, breaks in and adds his own input. Now, what we've heard before him is an exchange of monologues, which are presented in the form of dialogues, and we've heard from Job for the 9th time. And in between him, we hear from Eliphaz the Temanite 3 times, Bildad the Shuhite 3 times, and Zophar the Naamanite twice. So Job frames around them. And some of these speeches, not only between Job but also his comforters, are more than one chapter. But in the 28th one, it's an interesting interval. It has no relatable reference or identifiable inference to Job's personal experience. So much so because since in the ancient Hebrews, they were not in the practice of recording quotation marks, as are we. A lot of scholars believe that this was the author of Job himself adding his own input. And we do hear from him for the first 5 verses in the range we're going to cover today. We don't actually hear the words of Elihu until the 6th. But then in the 29th, Job looks back with fond nostalgia to a life that once was prior to this calamity, this sudden wave, and just all this disaster that struck him in the twinkle of an eye. Job had an upright life, and he was rewarded in proportion to his righteousness. He prospered because he conducted business honestly, and honesty was the best policy. But he had all the respect, and he was always there to lend a hand to the poor, the helpless, and the needy. And now that in the 30th chapter, he begins to describe after the calamity which struck him, what his life is like now, and it's a revolutionary reversal for the worst. And the most distressing element of it all is that Job is now needy, helpless, and wanting. And none who have the power to do so will do so for him what he would do for them had their shoes been in reversal. Then in the 31st chapter, he just lays down Job. What we have between Job and his misleadingly named comforters is a sustained stalemate, an irresistible force meeting an immovable object. Job stubbornly clings to the integrity of his own innocence, while these friends approaching him from the black and white, simplistic, archaic theological prism, which suggests that all sin is merited and all suffering is merited in proportion to sin. This just belittles the reality of the machinations of of life. But Job closes. He gets the final word. Now, his 9th speech is 6 chapters, and Elihu, who has a window, we read that he is pent up with words, and he proves it by launching the first of 6 chapters, which collectively comprise his speech. But in the 31st chapter, Job, we see the formula of if I have done anything, then he invites the merited destruction on him, and he says, what is he saying is that I have done none of these things, so I did not deserve what I have. He says that 7 times, and then he says 3 in a row in the 19th through the 21st verse, the final of which is, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless when I saw I had help in the gate, let my arm fall from my shoulder and my arm be broken from the bone. So he had the mindset of the Savior that if your bodily member or organ causes you to sin, get it out. If you mutilate it, because if you can't remove the disposition in your heart, which moves the hand, which steals from the poor, and the fatherless, the orphans, the vulnerable, he's saying he would rather enter into the afterlife as a maimed saint than a healthy sinner. And then he says, if 24th verse, if I have put my trust in gold, or called fine gold my refuge, if I have rejoiced because my wealth was great, and because my hand had gained much. He says one more if he had secretly been enticed by idolatry. This is one of the secret sins that Job's friends might have imagined he did, that he gazed at the stars in worship and surrender and submission at night. But then he says, that too is a punishable wickedness, for I would have denied El above. So he would have said that he would have been guilty as charged if he had done any of these things. But what is he saying is that I have not. Job had wealth. He could have possessions without being possessed by them, and God is not against you having things. He's just against things having you. So Job was righteous enough to be trusted with the fair weather faith, the prosperity, but what was missing in his for the fullness of his faith was the foul weather faith. He had to sink to the bottom to complete the picture, and he has ended up being rewarded twofold for not forsaking him or cursing him to his face and all this. 29th and 30th verse, if I have rejoiced when he who hated me was ruined, or lifted myself up when evil found him, also I have not allowed my mouth to sin by asking for a curse on his life. Job had the respect for enemies, even those who hated him. Now, Job probably didn't hate those who hated them. That's why he did not rejoice when they were ruined. He took no sadistic delight in the destructions of those who hated him. And why would they hate Job? They envied him because of his success. They envied him because of his righteousness. That has a repellent quality to lost and fallen sinners. But he also petitions that his lack of indulgence in imprecatory prayer. Imprecatory prayers are the practice with which we call for divine curses to befall on enemies, and we read some of these in the book of Psalms, but that is something that we Christians generally do not do, and it is also something that Job did not do. 35th verse, who would give me a hearing, see my signature, let El Shaddai answer me, and let my accuser write an account. He's longing for an audience in the judgment, he longs for his vindication, so he's just praying above frequently and fervently for an audience with Elohim, and he says that throughout several previous chapters, but he's putting his signature on it, he's calling him down, he's summoning him, and in the silence which passes is an eloquent witness of God's statement that he is sovereign and he is not at our command and control. But he wants to know what sin is he being punished for, because he can't think of any in this laundry list. I would declare to him the number of my steps. I would approach him like a prince. This is an act of presumption, not faith, how we approach the Almighty. We cannot approach him like a prince. We have to approach him like a beggar, broken and humbled, and not like, one who can just approach him casually or friendly. He is our friend, but he is not our equal. So this is one of the sneaky sins of self-righteousness, and this is one of the many occasions that some of the few occasions where it sneaks through. We have identified others in previous chapters, but even though Job did not suffer because he sinned, he did sin in his suffering. He vindicated himself, but seemingly at the expense of God, because he said, I am just, so what happened to me makes God unjust. And this provokes the ire and wrath of one young observer who was respectful and reverential to his elders. And once they didn't have anything to say, that's when he burst out onto the scene. And he adds a breath of life to this this dialogue, which is increasingly degenerating in an acrimonious direction. He has perspective. He does not have a dog in the fight. He does not have no element of partiality. He is upset, and he criticizes both Job for vindicating himself at the expense of God, and Job's comforters for not answering him correctly. First verse, 32nd chapter. Then these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Guilty as charged, we just identified precisely where. He was saying because he had done all these things, he was able to he should be able to approach God like a prince, and he does get what he asks for and he longs for, and he is rebuked for speaking presumptuously. But what's interesting also is that Job's three comforters are the ones who Yahweh verbally chides as being incorrect about him. He does not mention Elihu. Elihu says much that is correct and much that is studied and much that is sincere. But, he is somewhat youthful and naive in some of his assumptions. And the wrath of Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite of the clan of Ram, burned against Job. His wrath burned because he declared himself right rather than Elohim. He probably considered this a righteous wrath, so he couldn't stand the offense of another man exalting his own justice while degrading the justice of the Almighty. And it's also interesting that he has this pedigree that the others lack. And the mention of the father, we read the towns from which the three comforters hail. And Job is also a man of Uts. We don't read who his father is. So this probably means that he was not yet the patriarch of his own family, whereas Job and his contemporaries were the patriarchs of families. But in any case, he's angry, and anger is the motivating factor in compelling him to speak, and he does have a long-winded speech. And against his three friends his wrath burned, because they had found no answer and pronounced Elohim wicked. So in his eyes, their inability to answer Job correctly was a chide, was a degradation against the Elohim in whom they claim to speak and have this great wisdom for. So he's mad at them too. So everywhere he looks, every participant in the discussion provokes his ire and his wrath. So he does not. This does add an element of impartiality to his judgments. He does not have a personal or partisan axe to grind. He is on no one side, but he considers himself on God's side, and he offers his input and his perspective. And because they were years older than he, Elihu waited to speak to Job. He had respectful reverence for the principle of respecting one's elder. Now, when an older person is in the room, when they speak, you listen. That's just a general rule, and no harm can come from that. Respect for elders is foundation. It's embedded in the Decalogue, the fifth commandment, the first one with the promise. So he is respectful and gives the due deference to his elders. He did not speak until they ceased to speak. They ceased to answer Job because they had met their match in him. He gave out the final burst, and no one could answer him after this point. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, his wrath burned. And Elihu, so this is the final word of the author. Remember that we were going to hear the words of Elihu himself beginning in the 6th verse. So the author provides the information of why he says what he is about to say. He's looking, he's observing, he's listening, but he doesn't like what he hears. He's upset and offended, and he is motivated by a defense, a sincere passion in defense, and a youthful exuberance, which is restrained by his respect for his elders. So he takes the opportunity to say what he's about to say. We read of that beginning in the 6th verse. And Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite, responded and said, I am young in years, and you are aged. Therefore I was afraid to let you know my opinion. We haven't commented on the Buzite part. This is the hometown from whence he hailed. This would have been native to Aram or Arabia. It was in the east. So none of the participants in this dialogue are of Hebrew descent. Job and his three comforters were of Edomite descent, and Elihu is also from the east. Edom was to the east. It was below. It shared the border at the Jordan River, or the sea separating Israel from Jordan. It was at the bottom level of that, and Aram would have been in Syria to the north, and Arabia would have been further to the south. So we don't know with precise look. It could have been either one of these locations. But he acknowledges his youth, and they're elderless. He has respect for his elders, and so much so that he did not. It's with great reluctance that he is in fact deigning to share his insights and input, but he does claim, to be speaking in the power of the Spirit and in his wisdom, as do they. I said days should speak, and many years should teach wisdom. Now, even a fool is made wiser by the process of aging. They accumulate more life experience, and they get to eventually see that the life that they had lived is not worth it. So they are wiser. It is better to be wise early than to be wise late. And the fact is that wisdom is not the exclusive monopoly of the elderly. And let no man despise thee of thy youth, as Paul said to Timothy, if you are young and wise. So we do have a lot to teach them. They certainly have a lot to teach us. But as a general principle, the average youngster should not presume to lecture or instruct their elders unless a certain occasion demands. And his conscience was clear and his integrity was intact in saying this. But truly it is the spirit in man and the breath of El Shaddai that gives him understanding. This spirit is a lowercase spirit. It is the intrinsic element in our nature. There is a spirit world and we have a spiritual nature. A spirit world is invisible. So we have this invisible element within us that enables our contemplation and fellowship of the divine. It is part and parcel of being made in the image of divinity that we have the capacity for religiosity and spirituality. So he's not speaking of the spirit, the Ruach Kadesh, the divine spirit, but he's speaking of the spirit which is resident in me, you, and everyone else. This is this spirit is also the element which enables our cognitive capacities and our ability to intuit and assess and analyze. The multitude are not wise, nor do the aged understand justice. This is a fact of life. The majority of the human race in any culture, continent, or time span is by law of nature stupid, and wisdom does elude the majority of those who walk the earth. It is a rare treasure and a precious commodity, and age is no guarantee thereof. So if these men who claim to be wise, these elderly men who had spoke, the three of them had claimed to be wise, they would treat Job with more justice. So Elihu approaches Job from a different angle. He does not engage in personal invective. He corrects he does not falsely and libelously accuse him of secret sin, as did these three friends, these former friends of him, who are less than friendly now that Job is in the mud and in the dirt. But they are rebuked and chided appropriately enough in the end. Therefore I have said, listen to me, let me also make my opinion known to you. So he wouldn't do these things unless he had something to say that was worth listening to. So he has the confidence and the assurance that he is equally qualified to add his insight and input, having observed and listened and digested. And now that they are silent, he's going to take his turn, because this debate, this dialogue has reached an unsatisfactory conclusion. And if the book of Job ended any way other than it does, with a condescension of Yahweh in the form of the storm, in the form of the whirlwind, it would just be a pointless book for Job to be left with no answer and no response and no reward. Look, I waited for your words. I listened to your reasonings while you searched out what to say. He was paying attention while they were formulating their thoughts. While they were thinking, he was thinking about what they were thinking. So he was an attentive observer and a meticulous one at that. He is paying attention to every word, and more than that, why a person thinks the way they do is more difficult to discern, but a more essential ingredient than knowing what they think. Knowing why they think is the mark and measure of the wise. And I paid close attention to you, but look, not one of you proved Job wrong, nor answered his wrongs. He doesn't name the three, but he does name Job, and not one of you means none of the three there that were present, who, according to him, who had paid with diligent attention and oversight, and a meticulous observer and analyzer of events, according to his observation and analysis, they had not answered him satisfactorily. These libelous accusations had not proven Job wrong, and Elihu does not have a beef with Job's past, what happened to him. He's only interested in what he has heard him say. He corrects the fact that he exalted himself at the expense, claiming that because he was just and this injustice came upon him, that Elohim was unjust. But here he's speaking, he's equally offended by these three men's inability to answer him satisfactorily, and this is what moves and prompts him to add his own input and his own insight and his own observations accumulated from what they have said, and just, the spirit that speaks within him. Lest you say, we have found wisdom, it is El that drives him away, not man. So, wisdom, where can it be found? This is the nature of the 28th chapter. The author of Job just comments on the elaborate extents and the efforts and the energies that humanity goes through, the great risks and risk of our lives and risks of our health and safety to dig the treasures from the mountains, these semi-precious treasures that adorn the robes of kings and the wealthy. But, how much better off would we be if we knew where to find wisdom? And none of these men, according to the author or Elihu in the 28th verse, had quite found it yet, nor even Job. But Job would receive the wisdom that he sought, even though he was not answered, because Yahweh does not owe him an explanation. He is a God of promises, and he does not owe us an explanation. He doesn't provide Job one. We do know that from the earlier portion of the book, the first 2 chapters, why it transpired. Now he has not ordered words against me, so I would not answer him with your words. He acknowledges the fact that Job had not retaliated with any invective against him, although he had, and perhaps rightly so, in reference to those who had personally attacked him. He called them, stupid in as many words a few times, and dumb, and just deaf, and all these things. But they accused him of being a secret sinner. And they had no proof. They have broken down. They have not answered again. Words have departed from them. So he's also frustrated and moved and compelled to speak by the unsatisfactory conclusion of this dialogue, of this discussion. If Job had the last word, and it's almost Elihu's presence and input is completely necessary. Just for some reprieve before the majestic condescension of Yahweh in the whirlwind he had to have, who was watching the entire time. And I have waited, but they do not speak, because they have stood still. They answered no more. Again, their inability to their inability to answer him even verbally at this point, or adequately before, is absolutely positively deafening to his ears. So that is why he speaks. He's aware he's in the presence of his elders, and these men's reputation for wisdom would have been greater than their own. They would have been more established in society and prosperity. They would have been the patriarchs of their own family, whereas he was younger. We don't know how much younger. We don't know the age of Job, although he did have 10 children prior to losing them all in the first chapter. And then he is rewarded with twofold of what he had before. His wife eventually conceives 20 children, but in any case, Job is the man of his house and the patriarch of his family. Let me answer on my part. Let me also make my opinion known. So he has already explained his justification for speaking. He paid respectful tribute and homage to his elders. He knew that these men were men of reputation and wisdom, yet the deficiency is just glaring to him, so much so that he respectfully, and he does it with class, makes his complaint and his protest known. But he doesn't have a dog in the fight. He does not have any personal dimensions. He has no desire to attack Job or anyone else who has not attacked him. He's going to attack the arguments, not the arguers. And this is the definition of integrity in debate. For I am filled with words. The spirit within me presses me. He is absolutely, this is no understatement. As many chapters as Job's most recent tirade was, and remember the 28th chapter was possibly not his reflections, not his words, so it is even longer burst of wind that this young observer, who's sitting in until he can't hold it back anymore, the stunned silence is deafening to him, so he has to step in because he has to make himself known, and the spirit within him prompts him, and he doesn't claim the spirit, the capital spirit, he's just saying the element in him, our spirit, which can be aligned with the spirit for the ultimate state of spiritual success. But that's what's moving him, and that's what's animating him, and that's what's compelling him to make his voice known and make his thoughts understood. And he does consider himself both an expositor of original thought and an effective communicator thereof. See, within me is like wine not open, it shall burst like new wineskins. In the ancient world, wines were contained not in glasses, but in skins, animal skins that had hair on the outside, and old wineskins could not contain new wine. They would burst just because they were the ephemeral nature of these compared to bottles. So the science and the dynamics are also there, what he's describing. Metaphorically is just the words that are overwhelming him and exuding through him and in him and out of him and to them is just he's ready to burst like a new wineskin filled with wine. So a wineskin bursts, it expands, whereas an old one, you put new wine in, it eventually withers and decays and corrupts. And we can also read the New Testament, Matthew's 9th chapter and Mark's 2nd, and Luke's 5th, for maybe Luke's 5th, I'm not quite sure, on the new wine that the Savior came to bring, the revolutionary good news, the new religion, according to which the old wineskins of the Jewish systems were incompetent and incapable of containing anymore. Let me speak so that I find relief. Let me open my lips and answer. He needs relief. He seeks it, and he's going to hope to find it just by making his thoughts known and getting out this burst of energy and thought and activity in his mind out in the open, because if he holds it in any longer, he's going to explode. So he seeks relief by entering into and participating in the dialogue, and he does so to his credit, respectfully, eloquently, and wisely and prudently. Thus far, he establishes the fact that he is not going to attack any arguers. He's going to only attack arguments, and he's upset with both of them for both legitimate reasons, justifiable reasons. Please let me not show partiality to anyone, nor let me flatter any man. We've already established the fact of his impartiality. He does not have a dog in this fight. He is not personally invested in the personal insults, exchanges of insults between and betwixt. But flattery is not it is not communication. It is manipulation. Flatterers tell the people they flatter the things they want to hear to manipulate them to their advantage. And flattery is the language not only of the seductress or the seductor, but also the sycophantic suck-up and the all-talk, no-action politician. So stay away from flatteries and flatterers. There is such a thing as praise that is sincere, but flattery is the cheap counterfeit knockoff, the insincere praise that is utilized for ulterior motives and with nefarious, selfish intent. So he doesn't want to do that, and we shouldn't. In as much, we secretly like flattery, we like to hear it, but he's saying he's not going to flatter anyone with what he has to say. He is impartial, just in as much, he is motivated by anger, but he is emotionless in his presentation. Just cool, calm, and rational, almost. For I do not know how to flatter, lest my Maker should take me away. So this is somewhat similar to the if-then formula. If I should do these things that Job said in the 31st chapter, then I would invite and merit the punishment, which would be the just retribution, and the retaliatory response would be just in response to my deserved punishment. But, Elihu is at least aware of the dangerous and destructive potential of the sin of flattery, which ultimately, and in the final analysis, amounts to a denial of the Maker. So he has every right and reason to take us away, wipe us out, just kill us, strictly speaking, to an extremist interpretation of the idea that every sin merits death. But we're not extremists. We try to present the balance and the whole as thoroughly and as just not imposing my own ideas. The reason I have my ideas is to present my ideas is so that you can use them as a wellspring to your own build your own ideas on top of my found ideas. That's what I'm here for. So I don't know what you're here for, but I'm glad you are here. In any case, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. So glad to see you. Take care until next time. Take care until then. Bye-bye.